Why do urbanists, and why does everyone, frankly, love Tokyo so much? Joe McReynolds is an adjunct professor at Georgetown and one of the authors of the book Emergent Tokyo, Designing the Spontaneous City. He joins the podcast to discuss what makes Tokyo so special. We discuss the role of markets versus centrally designed principles when designing a city. We talk about Tokyo's use of small and neglected spaces that other cities might ignore. And we talk about what he calls emergent versus corporate-led design. This episode was originally a Patreon and member-exclusive episode, but now released to everyone. If you want to get every single episode of the podcast, including our bonus episodes, make sure you sign up and support us at patreon.com/neoliberalpodcast. You can also get these episodes by becoming a member of the Center for New Liberalism. You can become a member at cnliberalism.org/become a member. We appreciate everyone's support and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Neoliberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and joining me today is Joe McReynolds. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I want to just start with something simple. When did you fall in love with Tokyo, and why?
So I fell in love with Tokyo, I think, when I studied abroad in Japan, not in Tokyo. I was in the opposite of Tokyo. I was living in a truck stop in rural Japan on Japan's version of Route 66, just like surrounded by rice fields with an elderly host family. And I took a train trip to visit a friend living in Tokyo. And I had been missing cities for a while. And I found myself in this maximum city. And just the contrast was mind-blowing. And then through my 20s, working in foreign policy, I was traveling the world as much as I could. I was seeing cities all over the world because I love cities. And just nothing quite captured the flexibility, the possibility, the spontaneity of Tokyo. And the fact that I speak Japanese pretty randomly. I went public school in California. French, Spanish, and Japanese were the foreign language options, and Japanese sounded like the most unusual, so I went for that. But speaking Japanese really helped unlock all sorts of Tokyo's possibilities for me. And that was definitely key to falling in love with the city.
So you've obviously lived in Japan for a while, and across a number of different times even. And I've visited Tokyo a number of times. I think I've been 7 or 8 times at this point. And I agree with you that Tokyo is a really cool, special place. It's just different. And I live in New York. I live in a global megacity, and you spend time in New York too. But Tokyo is just, there's something unique about it. What would you say makes Tokyo so different and cool and special?
Yeah, so I'm talking to you right now from Park Slope, Brooklyn. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in New York, and I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, and yeah, Tokyo is a global city, but it feels so different than other global cities around the world. And what I think that is honestly just this sense of serendipity and possibility. Like you walk through a neighborhood street in Tokyo and you just never know what you're going to find. And this is at the same time as American cities, I think, are getting honestly more predictable over time, more paint by numbers, more not corporate, but more sort of governed by by kind of a rational economic logic that makes sense. This fast casual restaurant, you know how it works in a spreadsheet.
I mean, you do say the word corporate quite a lot in
Yeah.
the book. The book has a whole spiel that it goes on. There's a
Yeah.
contrast that it draws of what it calls like corporate architecture. Is that like a category in your
Or
mind?
corporate urbanism. Yeah. Like I think yeah, it's parts of a city that are governed fundamentally by economic logic, a logic of dollars and cents. Here's why this restaurant, this store, this whatever is here. It's going to make money, and so we decided to put it here to make money. Versus parts of a city that are governed by something else, by people's personal passions or idiosyncrasies. Um, one of my favorite little stores in Tokyo. So I'm from Orange County, California, and I'm a Tokyo researcher, a Tokyo obsessive. And there's this guy in Tokyo. He's a Tokyoite who is an Orange County obsessive, and he has an Orange County, California little specialty shop where he's got the Trader Joe's tote bags for sale. He's got the supermarket frequent shopper scanning cards for sale, just like all the little stuff. Our Alt Weekly, OC Weekly. He's got back issues of that. And that store doesn't exist because there's, economically speaking, it's an efficient thing to put in that space. It exists because of his personal passion. And so the question, how much of a city is given over to just like essentially urbanism by spreadsheet versus urbanism by individual idiosyncratic personal passion, individual choice and community building, that to me is a huge question about cities. And it's part of why Tokyo feels so different than other megacities. You can pursue the weird passionate dream you have of the little coffee shop or bookstore you've always wanted to open, or more niche stuff from there. You can do that in Tokyo so much more easily than in New York City. I know folks who have opened up a little bar or a restaurant with maybe just a couple $1,000s of starting capital, which, if you know anything about what it costs to start a small physical business in New York City, it's an order of magnitude different, easily tens of thousands of dollars difference. So that is just a huge factor for what makes Tokyo what it is. And part of the book also is that people, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more down into the interview, but a lot of people talk about Tokyo as being the result of unique, mysterious Japanese culture. Well, Tokyo works the way it is because, there's Japanese, they're so conformist, they're so polite, they're so blah, blah, blah. And researching the book, especially, what I learned was, no, it's actually people are people, and there are public policy factors here. There are concrete real world factors here of what it costs to start a small business, what it costs to have health insurance running a small business, what it costs to make a life in the city, all these practical concerns that shape why cities are the way they are. And the people reach for these just so stories that are kind of Orientalist, but they're not really backed up by much of anything. They're kind of in some ways they're an excuse to not have to learn from Tokyo, because if you can say, oh, Tokyo's so different because of Japanese culture and we're not Japanese, we're American, then you excuse America from having to learn anything. from this city that we all find successful.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like a very lazy way to approach the problem. That, oh well, Tokyo's like this because that's just how Japanese people are. Shrug
Yeah.
emoji, I guess.
Yeah,
So
it's fatalist and also kind of racist. Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that I want to dig into. But I guess the first thing is reading through the book, which is very much kind of a love letter to Tokyo, with you and Jorge, your co-author, and I think the whole Studio Lab organization probably contributed to this book.
Yep.
But one of the things that stands out very, very clearly, there's a number of kind of contrasts and themes in the book. And one of the themes is kind of the love of small spaces, whether it's a yokucho, which is like a very small restaurant in an alleyway, or I guess the izakayas are the restaurant, the yokucho is the alleyway itself, or whether it's kind of the specific buildings where there's very small commercial buildings they can be very small, but there's a business on the first floor and the second floor and the third floor and the fourth floor. You can go 6 stories up and you're still getting like an active restaurant. It seems, to a third one in the book is the way that space is used underneath freeways and underneath railways, elevated railways, that even that space is home to all sorts of very small micro businesses. Can you make the case overall for why these things are good? Why is it so good to have kind of micro restaurants, micro businesses, really small spaces being utilized efficiently? Why does that make Tokyo feel so cool?
Well, 2 parts to this. First, I'll answer your question, and then I'll mention the biggest category of microspace that would be the easiest thing to have in America if we chose to have it. So, first off, why do microspaces make Tokyo so great? Well, microspaces make any city great because they enable flexibility, they enable experimentation, they enable subcultures of all different kinds. They really help in protecting against the displacement that really sometimes comes of communities with gentrification in the United States. I don't consider gentrification inherently a bad thing. It's just kind of, it's like the tides. It kind of is what it is. But a lot of times in America, rightly or wrongly, we associate it with the old community getting pushed out for a newer, often wealthier, whiter community moving in. And when you have a lot of micro spaces, what you see in Tokyo neighborhoods is a new community can be layered on top of an old community without pushing out the old community, because there's when space subdivides and subdivides, there really ends up being the sort of the right spaces for everyone, and there's more granularity to the cityscape. I will also say this definitely helps with historical preservation. Um, Architects will tell you that Tokyo is one of the worst cities in the world for historical preservation because, firebombing of World War II, Great Kanto earthquake of 23, bubble economy of the 1980s. They say like, oh, all the architecture from a century ago is gone pretty much. So it's a terrible city for historical preservation. But if you forget just century-old buildings and instead you look at, mom and pop businesses and communities that go back to the 60s and 70s, it's actually Tokyo is one of the best cities in the world for historical preservation in that sense. If I want to experience, gritty golden age 1960s, 70s New York, there's not really a whole lot around too much still. And what is around is far flung, or it's at this point kind of a tourist trap, or you name it. But if I want to experience retro Tokyo, it's thousands of businesses, whole neighborhoods, and the communities, the people that inhabit them are still there doing their thing and feeling about like what they once did. And don't get me wrong, maybe 75-80% of the businesses from that era have closed. But Tokyo has over 10 times as many bars and restaurants as New York City. And so you lose 75-80% of that. That's still thousands of businesses, whole thriving neighborhoods still there that you can go out and experience. So that part is cool, historic preservation. I will also say it enables really cool neighborhoods around like shared kind of communities of interest, like the Golden Guy drinking and bar district that's become kind of world famous. It's almost 300 micro bars in a single city block, and those bars are in some sense in competition with each other, because you go into one, maybe not the next, but they're also in some sense cooperating with each other to form this district that's attractive and pulls people in to find the bar that speaks to them.
We're going to talk about Golden Guy. We're going to
we'll leave Golden
we're going to
Guy
have
for
a whole
cool.
Yeah. No, I do want to say I twitched a little bit when you said historical preservation, because
I know.
I in New York I associate it with like
NIMBYs,
tactics, that there's something like 30,000 buildings in New York that are marked as historical preserved buildings, and like you just can't build. I don't know.
My house in DC is in a historically preserved neighborhood, Mount Pleasant, and it's quite pretty, but it's also a huge impediment to development. And I'm
guessing you mean it just more in the sense that if you want to experience old things in an authentic way, not necessarily the way that it's like weaponized in America.
Exactly, and that is one of the big takeaways from doing research on Tokyo. Is a lot of our hardcore battle lines on urban policy in the United States that we think of as we know the right answers, we know the bad people with the wrong answers. They get really scrambled when you go to another context, especially a context where there's not a scarcity of housing. Like, housing scarcity really shapes so much of urban politics in America in like every sense. And so in Tokyo, you find stuff that by American standards would be hyper YIMBY and it works, or hyper YIMBY and it's not working, hyper NIMBY and it works, hyper NIMBY and it's not working. Libertarian stuff, socialist stuff that's bad and good, and all the like. I mean, Tokyo is kind of almost divided up between rival megacorps for some of its development in some ways, which feels, hyper libertarian, and yet many other aspects of the socialist style safety net are what enable interesting community life and small business to thrive. So it's you have this mixture of different things that doesn't fall neatly within our battle lines, and I've learned to just kind of embrace that, even though, like, cards on the table, I am very much a YIMBY urbanist type. But I will say, back to microspaces really quick, the biggest category of microspace that we could also have very easily in the States if we wanted to, it's just a policy question, is the bottom floors of people's row houses. Now, in Tokyo, they have zoning like we have zoning, but their most residential zoning in Tokyo is very, very different from our most residential zoning. In the most residentially zoned parts of Tokyo, if you have a 2-story row house, by right, you can put in a little restaurant, a little boutique, a little bar, a little workshop, a little classroom, just kind of whatever suits you, really. And so walking through a neighborhood in Tokyo, you have all these little mom and pop small businesses, and some of them, it's the old person living up on the second floor is the one managing the shop. Sometimes they've decided to rent out their bottom floor because they're getting older and they'd like having young people with some energy downstairs trying something interesting. And so that completely changes the feeling of walking through a residential neighborhood. Because in America, you walk through a residential neighborhood, if you don't have any reason to be there, then you don't like if you don't know anyone in the neighborhood, there's nothing for you. There's this Main Street versus Elm Street division, as my coworker likes to say. And in Tokyo, things are just much more mixed than that. And I think that ensures that there will always be tons and tons of micro spaces in Tokyo because, the Yokocho alleyways that we just talked about, or the multi-story, they're called Zakyo buildings, where you have the bars and restaurants on every single floor, going up 10 floors, whatever. Those types of buildings, they can build more of them, build less of them. They can be products of Japan's unique post-World War II history or things like that. And even without, if those all died off, you would still have tons and tons of microspaces because people buy houses. People have houses and they have a ground floor of their house and they can do things with that.
So I want to dive into a couple different aspects of the book, and I really enjoyed the book. For those of you out there, the book, again, is Emergent Tokyo, and it's a really interesting book in that it describes a lot of phenomenons. You can read it. There's paragraphs of text, but it also has a lot of space devoted to kind of diagrams and illustrations and like really high quality visual aids to really help you picture like what's going on here. What do we mean when we say a Yokocho alley, or when we talk about like underground, malls, or underfill underneath a rail station? Really, really cool visual stuff in the book as well. If I did have one criticism of the book,
hit me.
I think that there are points at which it's confusing whether or not the book is in favor of like planning-based solutions or market-based solutions. The opening chapter of the book definitely kind of takes some pot shots at, free market fundamentalism, so-called market forces. There's some of that kind of language in there. And certainly there's a couple mentions of neoliberal capitalism and neoliberal city planning and things like that. And that's all fine.
Let me just stop you real quick. I'm pretty sure we don't use the term neoliberal in the book because I told my European co-author, like, neoliberalism means something different in America.
It is in the last chapter. It snuck its way in the last chapter.
Yeah. Okay, he got one in there. Okay.
But so, and it's fine if you're against market forces and you want to make a case against that because, market forces are certainly not perfect. But the other thing that I did notice is that at the same time that kind of free market fundamentalism is kind of being given some shade, it's also being talked about how so many of these very lovely things, whether it's the alleyways or the Zakyo buildings or whatever, or the infill underneath rail tracks, so many of them came from basically unregulated black market spaces where it was an illegal market that just sprang up out of nothing. And there's a bunch of like low-level entrepreneurs, people just hustling, trying to get their, make some money for the day. And that it came from this very bottom-up process. And I look at that and I would say, like, that's the free market at work. That's small-time business owners who are trying to make money. And it was interesting because, like you mentioned earlier, that, this is like profit versus on one hand, you've got the profit, the Excel sheet, urbanism. And on the other hand, you have people's idiosyncrasies. But I think of like these small-time people and they're chasing profit. They want to make money. They're doing what they do because they want to make money as much as anybody. And so I just wonder, like, what is the actual view here in terms of, are market forces good? Are they bad? Are they somewhere in between? Like, how would you actually make this distinction as far as how you think about the market as opposed to planning, as opposed to some other factor?
I would say first off, the book is in some ways really a conversation between myself and Jorge, and finding a synthesis between our different ideas, and we overlap a lot, but definitely we are our own people with our own kind of lenses on the world. And so I think what you're seeing in the book is something of kind of, in some ways, the dialogue between us. But I would say this is, we like market forces. We find them very helpful to an extent in certain ways. And it's really, to me, a question of when and how. Like, are market forces good? Are they bad? Yes. It's like they're it's like, are the tides good? Are the tides bad? That, depends uh where you are in relation to the ocean, Yeah.
This is a pro tide podcast. We are firmly pro tides here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever staked out a political position on the tides? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
well, if you are floating out to sea, the tides may not be working in your favor at that moment. But it's so I think the key thing for me is balance. We try and talk in the beginning of the book about the different types of Tokyo neighborhoods that are end up in very different places for different reasons, like whether it's gigantic tower Tokyo or more kind of uh, local neighborhood Tokyo, and the way that Tokyo really needs all these different types of neighborhoods to function. Um, what I think we are sometimes critical of in the book are this specific style of new mega redevelopments in Tokyo, where um, sometimes it's done by a private mega developer, sometimes it's done by the city. So whether it's public or private, where they basically take a huge chunk of Tokyo where they've acquired all the land in a square, and they remake it into essentially a luxury shopping mall with some high-end apartments or things like that. Like, just kind of a Le Corbusier style tower in the park development. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of his name. Sorry to any French listeners, but you get what I mean. It's that specific style of redevelopment is not the end of the world, especially because Tokyo has very strong property rights. So it's hard to eminent domain people out and throw up a tower. And they serve their purpose, but they are not the reason that Tokyo is this globally beloved city. They are not the source of Tokyo's genius.
This is one of the through lines of the book, I think, is that the book is very enthusiastic about kind of the small spaces and the
Yeah,
what you would call in the book emergent Tokyo that grew up out of black markets and like
yeah,
unregulated spaces and
yeah,
eventually has now developed into kind of these long beloved features of the city.
yeah.
And then I think the other thing you contrast emergent Tokyo with is corporate Tokyo that is, like you said,
Corporate
giant,
led. Yeah,
giant glass towers with luxury shopping malls and things like that
yeah,
that don't have, and I think you kind of
yeah.
you you talk about how these places are often closed off from the rest of the city. They're like capsules as opposed to integrated into the city.
Yeah, they have like the feeling of a corporate campus sometimes when you walk through them. And that said, at the same time, especially the suburban apartment towers that are a huge part of Tokyo's housing picture, you absolutely need those. I mean, like, Tokyo is actually a very suburban city. People don't realize it. It's rail suburbs instead of car suburbs, which makes all the difference in the world.
And very
But
dense
yeah,
suburbs.
yeah, and you need that housing to have not have the American style scarcity of housing that reshapes everything for the worse. But this goes back to something that I have a lot of discussion about with, some people describe me as a neoliberal. Other people describe me as like a quasi socialist, or I get different labels from different people. And one discussion I have with people in these different camps is like if you have a mom and pop small business that's taking risks and doing their own thing and making something personal and interesting, um, and they're able to do that small business because of both flexible deregulated zoning and deregulated small business, and but also because of a generous socialist style safety net that takes care of education and health insurance and things like that. Is that socialist? Is that neoliberal capitalist? Is that it's at some point it becomes less interesting to slap a label on the thing and debate which labels are good and bad, and it becomes more interesting to just talk about, okay, what can we do that's different and better than what we're currently doing? What do we? And this is something where, um, when you get past the labels, something I found walking around both Tokyo and New York, that's like a big lesson for New York, is when I find an interesting small business in New York, I try and stop in and talk to them about why and how they're doing what they're doing. And I ask them about their landlord, and what kind of landlord they have. And a lot of times, the reason they're able to stay in existence and not get turned into, a proverbial Chipotle or Starbucks or whatever, is that their landlord is a co-op, or it's one of the other businesses in the building is that family has owned the building for 50 years, or it's just a small landlord that likes what they're doing, or or that maybe they own their own building, or there are all sorts of little stories. But people who have, I guess the term would be unconventional landlords versus just like a classic mega landlord where you are just a line on the spreadsheet to them and your rent will go up or down accordingly. That makes a huge difference what types of landlords you have in a neighborhood, in a city. Uh, the neighborhoods of Tokyo that are the most Tokyo-esque, the neighborhoods of Tokyo that are the least Tokyo-esque. They could be just, any section of Midtown Manhattan and not even one of the fun sections. Like oftentimes the difference is partly what kind of landlords you have, in addition to the spatial relationships, what kind of cityscape you've constructed. So to me, those kind of questions are relevant in as I look at any city in the world, and they're not easily reducible down to uh, free market good, free market bad. Am I playing for the Red Sox or am I playing for the Yankees in the grand sport of posting online, that kind of thing. It's
I get that, yeah. So I'm going to do something here, and I'm not even sure I fully believe this, but I
okay.
want to throw it out as kind of a devil's advocate argument.
Sure.
I'm going to try, if I can, to like make a steel man case for giant corporate development.
Go
For
for
the luxury malls, the glass towers, and the corporate landlords and the Chipotles of the world. Again, I'm not sure that I fully believe this, because I love all the stuff about Tokyo that you're talking about, and I love this parts of New York that are not like that. But I think there's some interesting questions that you can kind of ask yourself about why this happens in the first place. So here's my case. If you think about any other market, like let's say apples, people grow different kinds of apples. There's Red Delicious, there's Honey Crisp, there's Pink Ladies. And if somebody all of a sudden used to grow Red Delicious, but they look at their land and they say, well, I think I should grow Pink Ladies instead, and they start selling those Pink Ladies, normally we have a pretty strong assumption that they are doing that because it's what people want. It's not because of some idiosyncratic reason that they just love Pink Ladies. It's because the market is telling them that they can make more money with Pink Ladies. And the fact that they can make more money is only because it's what people want. They're serving the customer's needs. And that's not a universal rule,
Yeah.
but that works pretty well in a lot of contexts. It's a good rule of thumb to have.
Yeah.
And so then I think about that when it comes to these like giant luxury malls. And so if these giant luxury malls really are just like horrible and nobody really wants them, and these other spaces are so much more special and make the
Yeah.
city so much better, then why do companies think they can make more money out of these, out of building the glass towers, out of, to me, that's a paradox.
It's the Yogi Berra quote, the nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded, Yeah. No, I mean, there is a market for it, and there is a place for it in the city. And I think that's something that we try, especially in the concluding chapters, to kind of hammer home is we're not saying this one good, this one bad. We're saying that in the balancing between the two, cities often weigh more heavily to the side of the corporate mega development than they should, and that there are factors, structural factors for why that is. But also, even let's say for some things that type of development is the best way to do it. There are also some things that type of mega development just simply can't deliver, because it's a thing that can't simply be ordered up out of thin air with money. And to explain that, what I mean by that, I will tell you the story of the most unremarkable, mediocre bar in Tokyo. It's a little bar in Nonbei Yokocho, Drunkard's Alley in Shibuya, a Yokocho alleyway. It's been there since the post-World War II black markets. And there's this bar. It's a 4-seat bar. There is nothing remarkable about this bar. It's normal lighting. There's no special decor or theme. The drinks are just like absolutely just standard drinks. And yet someone had written in English above the bar in Sharpie, "This is better than all the bars of San Francisco." And I think what they were responding to, that euphoria they were feeling being in this, frankly, just completely unexceptional bar, was the fact that it had 4 seats, that it was intimate, that you have conversation with your bartender and your fellow patrons that you haven't met yet, that you feel like you're in a very specific place rather than just being in a place that's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And that feeling of intimacy and connection and community is very, very hard. I'm not going to say impossible, but is very, very hard to create through a large scale corporate development, because different neighborhoods and different cities, and especially different neighborhoods, I think paint with different emotional color palettes oftentimes, and feelings of intimacy and connection, in neighborliness, are things that are the result of scale and spatial relationships and things like that aren't just, you can't say, let's create a bar that feels intimate for our next mega development. Or even if you could hypothetically, the economic logic of that mega development and all the money you're pouring into it means that you don't. And in New York, for example, like the cost of a liquor license, cost of a liquor license in Los Angeles or DC pretty much dictates that any new bar or restaurant that serves alcohol is going to be a much larger scale than those 4 seats before you even get into like floor area minimums and other kind of regulatory questions, just because you have to invest tens of thousands of dollars up front. You need to make that back somehow. If you're only putting in, 1,000 $2,000 upfront cost to open a bar, you can afford to be intimate. You're not starting out in debt in a way that shapes those choices.
You're going to win a
So
lot of friends here by saying that, we should deregulate how much it costs to start a business. I will say that.
yeah, I mean, yeah, liquor licenses are a huge determinant of how a city functions. Also, here's another a weird one: property taxes. I growing up in California, I'm used to low property taxes being this like reason why everything sucks. Like low property taxes are how the boomers hoard their wealth, and how we all, my generation, millennials and Gen Z below us, how we all got priced out of California essentially. And there's of course truth to that, but then in how property taxes function in Tokyo in practice being quite low for little homeowners and mom and pop businesses and stuff essentially is low property taxes freeing people up to be more experimental with what they do with their small microspace because they don't have to put it towards the most economically efficient use in order to be able to pay the property taxes. So
It's very interesting you say that
yeah,
because we've just done a couple episodes on like Georgism where they're going all in on
yeah,
land value tax and they
yeah,
want that efficiency. But I think they're, in an American context, you think about that more like, well, we'll finally build something dense in our cities rather than just having suburbs, like
yeah,
American style suburbs everywhere. Whereas Tokyo is already so dense that it's even the
yeah.
suburbs in Tokyo are roughly as dense as more dense than most American downtown cores.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is a lot of times uh, you don't need a huge number of stories to have that density, and you don't necessarily even need it to be nighttime density. I mean, Tokyo's daytime density and nighttime density are worlds apart. At least from depends on the neighborhood, of course, but yeah, it's really our imaginations are so shaped by the context we grew up in. And I know I sound like kind of an Instagram influencer inspirational post right now, like travel, it will expand your horizons.
You've got
Yeah.
another career ahead of you.
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, I still, I'm trying to have the foreign policy career and the urbanist career at the same time, and juggling that is already crazy. I definitely don't need another, but yeah, expanding our thinking to different contexts around the world that are outside of our kind of specific battle lines. It's where I can talk about deregulation and the value of deregulation of small business, the value of the social safety net, the value of, in a Tokyo context, low property taxes, the value of high inheritance taxes that have pushed plots of land to get way more subdivided over time, actually being really valuable. The role that different megacorps play in positive ways. The fact that the transit conglomerates also do shopping and real estate and neighborhood development um, is actually a huge overall, I think, positive factor in how Tokyo functions. Like major elements of Tokyo's railway system, the majority of Tokyo's railway system really is in private hands, and that's actually working quite well. There's all these different aspects of Tokyo that just go outside of color outside of the lines, and that are not just ammunition for our side to beat their side in an American argument, but they can serve as inspiration still for how we imagine the future of American cities.
All right, so I kind of want to paint a picture here for people who've never been, because you and I are sitting here, talking about Tokyo, what makes it special, and debate back and forth, and it's hard for people who've never been to really get the picture. So I'm just going to tell a story about some of the places I love, and this is kind of just a personal, like, anecdote, but it's my podcast. I can do what I want. So,
Yeah.
like,
Do it. Invoke prerogative.
I'm just going to share what I think is cool, and maybe you can tell me, like, what are the things, what are the evocative things you would talk about when you think about these things?
Yeah.
I think about a bar that is sadly no longer with us. It was called, like, OK Bar, I think. It was in Omoide Yokocho, which was like the English name for it is Piss Alley, I think. Technically, they call it Memory Lane, but I think
there was a rebrand. Yes,
I think the government wants you to call it Memory Lane, but the original name was Piss Alley. So, that tells you something about the kind of place it is. But it's just this, tiny little alleyway. And when I say tiny, I mean you can, if you hold your hands out to each side, you can put your hand in the entrance of two bars at once.
Yeah,
because that's how small the alleyway is. And there was a bar there called OK Bar that there was a guy named Nori who ran the bar, and it was just his bar. And we went there like the first time we were ever in Tokyo, my wife and I. We had a good time. We took a picture with the bar owner because it was so cool. There's probably 8 people in this bar could fit. Maybe like 4 people upstairs if you climbed up this very sus looking ladder. You literally had to climb a ladder to get to the upstairs, but we had a great time. And then we would come back every time we would go to Tokyo, and like Nori would be like, oh, you're those crazy white people. I remember you, and we'd have a great time. And it got to the point where I would like bring him stuff from New York, and I don't know, it was just a beautiful time. And like, the bar, it's just so small that like I'm sitting at the bar itself and my back is also touching the back wall of the restaurant.
Yep.
It's that kind of place.
Yeah.
And you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with some Japanese salaryman who's asking you questions about New York, because his daughter's going there in a month and he's never been. And, somebody in the next building over is chain smoking and you can smell it. And it's just, I don't know, it's a magical place. It's like, it's very hard to recreate. That's my little story. Do you have stories either from an izakaya in a yokocho or from one of these Zakyo buildings, or do you have that kind of story that like captures the magic for you when you think about this kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the joy of Tokyo, really, and of cities that work like Tokyo, is you have a place that feels so vivid to you because it's so particular. And I mean, we've already talked about why those places exist. I can tell you a couple of mine. I remember the Dream Crushing Bar. I was at this point I was working in foreign policy, and I was just traveling to Tokyo every year for a couple weeks to visit, and there was this bar devoted to whatever your childhood dream is. And they had a few different options, like my childhood dream is to be an architect, or my childhood dream is to be a toy designer, or they're like a few different ones. And so I of course chose architect, and this bar simulates the worst part of that job. You are pulling an all-nighter for a demanding client, chugging shitty instant coffee, and building, like in my case, they gave you tasks. Like I had to build architectural models, which I'd never gotten to do before. And I'm just on deadline having to build architectural models, and with chugging instant coffee. And it did actually kind of cure me of the wow, what if in another life I'd been an architect? Yeah.
This is a weird concept for a bar, man.
The interesting thing, I actually learned later that this bar was not some postmodern, commentary on neoliberal capitalism or anything like that. The bar was actually earnestly sponsored by an instant coffee brand that was essentially saying, when you're pulling an all nighter for your demanding job, if you're going to drink shitty instant coffee, do it with our shitty instant coffee.
That is the cleverest little marketing gimmick that I've ever heard of. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
No, but in that's so that's just kind of like unique and interesting. But in a more niche, personal way, I will say there is a tiny late night izakaya right near the house in the old school neighborhood that I used to live in, right up until the pandemic in Tokyo, um, where it's the size of a tool shed, basically. And you step in and you feel like you're in kind of a time warp back to like 1960s, 70s Tokyo. And it's a place where kind of everyone knows each other and knows the proprietor. If you've ever seen the show Midnight Diner, I think it's on Netflix.
One of my wife's favorites, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's a
it's
great show.
that vibe, and and they'd put on late night Japanese TV, and since I lived in the neighborhood, for those who don't know, the trains in Japan shut off at like 11:30 at night, so you're either at that after that point you're either out all night or you're spending an insane amount of money for a taxi home, uh, or you live in the neighborhood, and so. Just like sitting there with the old guys watching NHK, the Japanese state television network, and getting my kind of language practice in, sipping a beer and eating tempura. Um, is it objectively the single, the best izakaya food in Tokyo? No, but it's my favorite and it's mine. And to have a place that is truly is yours, feels like yours because you have that connection, like what you did, bringing a gift from New York to Nori, the bartender in OK Bar. That is actually a very kind of common ritual in Japanese bars that you participated in. I've interviewed Japanese bartenders on like, what do you do when your beloved regulars bring you a gift and it's a terrible gift, but they expect it to be, displayed in the bar. And how do you manage that? And they're like, oh, they have a white lie of like, oh, I decided to keep that one at home actually because I really like it, or or there's another thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Called keep bottles, like a bottle of, whether it's a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of whatever your drink of choice is, that's behind the bar with your name written on it in Sharpie, and you've paid for the bottle, and you get drinks from it whenever you come in, and that is both a much more economical way to drink, versus paying however many dollars per drink. But it also it sort of cements a relationship of like, I'm a regular at this spot, and your status as a regular is kind of a thing. It often leads to then sometimes being a part-time bartender to then taking over a bar. It's a lot of people who are bartending or owning bars in these bar districts. They started out as just, a regular drinking in the bars there. And so you kind of, you gain entry into a social universe that is not something that I feel when I go out to the average kind of, generic bar in Manhattan. You go with friends and for the most part, you talk to the people that you came with. Depending on like, unless it's like a clubbier kind of bar and then maybe other people, but the idea of like that it's this small intimate experience, and that there's really a sense of community that is much more rare, and that's something that the places that are like that in New York are often the places that are most kind of under threat to economics no longer making it sustainable, or the owners aging out and deciding to sell, or things like that.
So there are a lot of things that I take away from the book in terms of like practical principles that I think you take away from Tokyo. I think about, that you need density everywhere, not just in your downtown core. You need your suburbs to be dense. I think low-rise density really matters. I think of, the importance of small plots of land as opposed to large plots of land, and kind of small businesses, small spaces. I think about the importance that you highlight in the book of kind of integrating different parts of the city together, that you don't want a bunch of like enclosed glass bubbles that are very hostile to the outside. You want spaces that spill into each other very naturally with lots of pedestrian traffic that just flows. And, the shops and the restaurants and the walkways are not really separated. All of those design principles are really good. But I guess my question is, if we're calling that like Emergent Tokyo, which is the name of the book, how do you design emergence? How do you plan for that kind of emergence? And is that even an oxymoron to say that you're planning for that kind of spontaneous thing?
No, I don't think it's an oxymoron at all. I mean, that's why the full title of the book is Emergent Tokyo: Designing the Spontaneous City. And I think, first off, the just the biggest, easiest change we could make to by design to allow this kind of spontaneity is to let people who own houses in your city do more things with the bottom floor of their house. Let them run a small bar, workshop, boutique, restaurant. I mean, I guess bar is probably a bridge too far for your average homeowners association, or folks worried about their property values in the US. Like that's going to scare off everyone. But start with just like being able to run a little boutique or a little restaurant out of the bottom floor of your residentially zoned house, and suddenly you have just a sea change in what our neighborhoods feel like, and we could go from there. I mean, that's a stroke of a pen in a zoning category. That is a choice of regulation. It doesn't necessarily need new municipal legislation or anything, and it could be done in stages. It could be done in test neighborhoods. There are all sorts of ways to be incremental about it and show people that they don't have to be scared of it. So that's a big one. Another one is actually European cities are starting to experiment with this now. The idea of mega blocks, that you take like a 2x2 or 3x3 city blocks, and you close off the interior of that mega block to car traffic and allow it to just be entirely, pedestrian and bikes and whatever inside that mega block. And that often gives rise to, let's call it Tokyo-esque urban life. Another is, as we are now redesigning our downtowns in some ways for a post-COVID remote work friendly American life, where we're all digital nomads now, and people aren't going into offices like they once were. People talk about turning those office towers into residential apartments in order to ease the housing shortage. And that's a good idea as far as it goes, but it's actually very difficult to do office to residential conversions a lot of times, for reasons of like unsexy how the sausage is made reasons, like heating and cooling systems, or how windows work for offices versus how you want windows for an apartment, things like that. But it's doing a conversion to commercial space, going up more floors, especially micro commercial spaces, that could be an interesting thing to do more of as well. That kind of that iconic neon nightlife of Tokyo, where you look up the side of a building and there's, of course, it's not really neon, it's LEDs these days, but you look up the side of a building, you see there's like businesses, bars, and restaurants and stuff going up all 10 floors of the building. We could do more of that in our downtowns. We could at least experiment with it, with all of this space that's going vacant. And my understanding is that right now, like I was just out in San Francisco for a while because my girlfriend lives in San Francisco, and I was I was noticing what a ghost town a lot of the downtown is, and I was hearing that a lot of landlords are really kind of holding out hope that post COVID that the old level of demand for commercial real estate is going to come roaring back, and they're holding out for the high rents. They don't want to lock in someone for 5 years at a lower rate. But if it doesn't come back eventually, if that bottom falls out, they're going to be looking for alternatives of what to do. And let's look at more Tokyo style approaches to where commercial space goes. That's definitely something that we could try. So I see a lot of possibilities here, but the biggest one is just let people do what they want with the bottom floor of their own house. That should be a rallying cry, like taco trucks on every corner has been a rallying cry.
All right, so I'm going to ask the final question now that we ask to everybody who appears on the podcast. And that question is, what would you recommend for people who want to learn more? I will start by recommending this book. The full title of the book, again, one more time, is Emergent Tokyo, Designing the Spontaneous City. It's by Jorge Almazan and Joe McReynolds. And it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I would say you can get it anywhere you buy books. You actually can't get it right now. It's not available anywhere because it's like it's sold out of its print run. So I think do you know when the next print run is coming, by the way?
So it was supposed to be April, and I think that print run was already pre-ordered and sold out. So it's on like the 5th print run now, which is a good problem to have.
This is a good problem to have, but it's a hard book to get, even though I do recommend it. It's great.
Message me on Twitter. If anyone listening to this, if you want a copy, message me on Twitter and we can maybe figure something out. I've got some author copies. Message me and I'll see what I can do.
I'm happy to recommend your book. I'll do that for you. But other than your book,
yes.
What else would you recommend for people to read or listen to? This could be podcasts or books or blogs if they are interested in Tokyo's urbanism.
So I will recommend a book that's actually not specifically about Tokyo, but is about a lot of the questions of how do we bring these qualities to American cities or not. And it's also a beautifully visual book. It's called The Arsenal of Inclusion and Exclusion. It's a book about all the choices we make that either welcome people into our cities or push them out. We didn't really get a chance to talk about the role of the police in Tokyo in the ways that they welcome some people in and push others or out or make life harder for some. And that's certainly a theme in a lot of American cities too. And so that's a book I absolutely recommend everyone read. And it will get you looking at cities in a whole new way. But in terms of if people curious about Tokyo specifically, like if you're going to read a book on Tokyo, read ours. But if you're going to read 2 books on Tokyo, I would also recommend a magazine actually called Too Much. Too Much is a magazine out of Tokyo in English. It's called a magazine of romantic geography, they call it. I think it's maybe the only magazine in the world to be about romantic geography. And what they mean by that, I think, is a little similar to what I talked about earlier about cities painting with different emotional color palettes, and about the ways that cities, intertwine with feeling and memory in complicated ways. I think, like a lot of people who study cities for a living, I got obsessed with Italo Calvino in his book Invisible Cities at a certain point as a kid. And that idea of how cities really link to our perceptions and emotions and intertwine with them has always fascinated me. And I think, too much magazine, a magazine of romantic geography. It's not always the easiest to find, but it is very, very worth it.
All right. Did you have any other final thought that you wanted to add, or?
Final thought. I will just state it for the record. So there is a record on this. Jeremiah did promise me, this was a total bribe, that I have entry into the neoliberal shill bracket for 2024 in exchange for a copy of the book. So let the record show. And then also, I just want to say to anyone listening to this who is involved in trying to make their city more dynamic, more interesting in some practical way, get at me. I'm very easy to find. I'm McReynolds Joe on Twitter. My name is Joe McReynolds. I would love to be a part, or just to offer thoughts, or just to hear about practical projects or activist projects or people working to make American cities more interesting. Whatever you're up to out there, if you'd be interested in talking to me, I'd be interested in talking to you about it.
All right. Well, one more time, the book is Emergent Tokyo by Joe McReynolds and Jorge. What is Jorge's last name? Jorge Almazan.
I can't quite roll the sounds, but yes, it's a very Almazan. Yeah.
Well,
or Almahan, I think maybe.
Maybe.
I think, yeah.
Either way, that's the book, and I've got to say, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.